just going to be an interesting one. Now, I want to say a year ago, I discovered something called phrenology. Now, phrenology, to my memory, I'll get the Wikipedia page up in a moment to refresh it, but phrenology, to my memory, was a old. I don't even remember if it was ever actually considered actual science in the actual field of science at the time. But regardless, phrenology was an old method of determining personality, and they did it by measuring the width, the size, etc. of your skull. For example, the perceptives there above your eye, if that was a particularly big area for you, then you would be defined as a perceptive person, a very perceptive person. I don't know what destructiveness would necessarily mean, but if that part of your ear was really big, then you'd be a destructive person. It was that, right? Now, it was totally baseless, pretty much. It was a science that existed but was never really taken seriously, except for among the population, like the general population of the Victorian era. So this is the Wikipedia page, right? Developed by German physician Franz Joseph Gall in 1796, the discipline was influential in the late 19th century, especially between 1810 and 1840. Phrenology today is recognized as pseudoscience. The methodological rigor of phrenology was doubtful even for the standards of its time, since many authors already regarded phrenology as pseudoscience in even just the 19th century. Its thinking was influential in psychiatry and psychology, and that's the thing. This science, this pseudoscience of its time, was actually ended up being important to us now, because this is what you could call the grandfather of neuropsychology. I thought it was neuropsychopathy for some reason, but it's not. It's neuropsychology. So even though this was wrong, like ridiculously wrong, it was actually really influential in our understanding of our personality, because it's one of the few. It was wrong, but its background underlying thought was correct, which is that your brain influences you, like the brain chemistry and the different things of that. So even though they were wrong about measuring the head and all that, it was actually quite important to understanding later on that your brain does influence you, and the size of the chemicals and all those things involved determine how you're made up and how you're likely to react to things and etc. So it did become important, but not in the sense that Joseph Gall originally invented it. So from just this baseline here, and I've read the whole Wikipedia page, and you can read it yourself if you're all that interested, but this isn't as interesting as this is. The basic summary is that it was wrong, provably so much so even that even people of the medical field, the scientific field of its day, didn't really consider it a true thing. The general population of the countries it was popular in, for whatever reason, found it believable. The same way that people now find star signs believable or something like that. So it's wrong, and it's provably wrong, but people believed it anyway because of lack of understanding of real science and general population things. Like, what are they going to go? They're just peasants working farms. With that out of the way, with this bit out of the way, knowing that it became useful to something that's real, what I want to look at is phrenology now, because I discovered that phrenology is still a thing that exists now. It's not necessarily taken seriously in say my country, the UK, or America, or any other countries really that was popular at the time, which was France, Victorian Britain, America. It wasn't really popular outside of those few countries. Where was it? Ireland, apparently. Ireland was the other one. through Spurzheim. Now that's someone I wanted to look up. Thanks for reminding me of that. So yes, but there was someone, I don't remember where it was, but someone in the United States sort of upgraded Joseph Gall's original vision of phrenology. And this is another reason why it didn't work out, because there was so much clashing of thought over the correct makeup of a human head. So if you look up images for phrenology heads, you'll see that they can differ quite a lot. And also another thing as well, there was people couldn't really determine if there was 20, I can't remember the exact numbers, but let's just say 20 points of interest to 30 points of interest. It was always some weird contention over how many points of interest there were, how many organs of the brain there were, as they called it, organs of the skull or whatever. But if you look through phrenology images, you do eventually come across things that sort of contradict each other. I'm not finding it right now, but it's because I'm an idiot apparently. Anyway, so I wanted to look at phrenology as it is now. Now there was someone who updated phrenology to a more modern day, and by modern day I mean like late 19th century, but modern for its time, and that has been where it's been for the past 100 or so years. I don't know if it was Spurzheim or not. I don't think it was. It couldn't have been because he died early. So it wasn't him, so who the bloody hell was it? Here we go. Right, so the Fowlers. This is the person I was thinking of. It was Lorenzo and his brother, who I don't think his brother was as big a deal as him, but anyway. So these are the people I was thinking about. Now they were popular in the 1840s. Now if you remember from the Wikipedia article, the phrenology was pretty much written off as a theory in the 40s because of growing evidence against it. Which is what makes this interesting, right? So America, in typical American fashion, don't listen to evidence, and Orson Welles, Lorenzo Fowler, you could say took advantage. I don't really know if they were taking advantage or if they were legitimate believers in it. I don't know if we know or not. You could probably look into it. But they started publishing a lot of pamphlets and books about it, and they started measuring heads and defining people by these measurements. So these are the people that modernized phrenology. Travelled to England in 1860 with his wife Lydia and daughter Jessie and partner Samuel Wells. Fowler lectured widely in Britain, and his tours led to the creation of new phrenological societies, just as earlier lecturers like Spurzheim and Combe had inspired similar societies. Now these are the two people that were under Joseph Gall when he was first inventing it. Fowler lectured at the International Exhibition of 1862 and then returned briefly to New York. He then emigrated to Britain to enjoy the rich phrenological pickings and founded the Fowler Institute in Ludgate Circus, London in 1863. Here he and his family and the employees gave practical instruction on phrenology, provided readings and character analyses, and offered weekly courses on practical phrenology. Now this is what I mean. This is how he made it a modern thing and something that exists now. The Institute had its own circulating and reference library of skulls and casts. In the 1870s, Fowler returned to the British lecture circuit and was popular, particularly in the Midlands. In 1886, he established and presided over the British Phrenological Association, which endured until 1967. This is important. So yes, these people wrote a lot of books in this time. Notice as well, these are well after phrenology. If it was like basically debunked in the 1840s, then by 1864 he's still writing these books, even to the point of 1896 when he was, I think he died around then. So yeah, I found somewhere a couple of websites that are still practicing phrenology. One of them was in Portugal, or I think Portugal, but fuck me if I can find these now. I should have probably looked this up before I came here. Okay, so the Fowler Institute is no longer really relevant as well. Fowler Institute has moved on to being more about therapy, as in mental health therapy, which makes sense because phrenology, again, it was the forefather of neuropsychology. So it makes sense that this has moved on to being a more what's it called? Mental health kind of wellness place. That it makes sense. 1931, Henry Lavery developed a machine with a number of springs, wires and probes. This machine was called the Psychograph. When this machine is worn on the head like a helmet, the probes of the machine would touch all parts of your head and measure the shape of the head. So 1931, this is now nearly 100 years after this is disproven, and people are still pushing this. The Psychograph by Henry Lavery still being pushed as an actual thing. Okay, so Henry Lavery developed this machine in 1931. This is nearly 100 years, 90 years after it's disproved. Phrenology cannot predict the future of a person like astrology or palmistry does. See? But it is useful to judge the strengths and weaknesses of people. Also, it is possible to know whether the person is lazy or willing to do work hard. Hence, it can be used by top companies in selecting the right people for various jobs. In the same way, it helps to select a suitable partner for marriage. So this is someone now. Like, I don't know when this website was put up, but I imagine this isn't like a dead website, otherwise it wouldn't still be here. But this is the thing. People are still peddling phrenology now. Like, is that not insane? We are in 2020, we are 200 years removed from phrenology first being a thing, and people are still peddling it when it's been totally disproven. So these are the organs that they have here. Amativeness, the region represents physical love, affection and sex. Parental love, the region at the back of the head, represents love for children and fondness for pets. Adhesiveness, region represents friendship and sociability. And again, these points were contested between phrenologists. Like, I'm not going to go too much into that because it's just confusing. But most of these now use the Orson Fowler definitions. But the Joseph Gall original was slightly different. I don't remember how, and it's not worth looking into. But they're slightly different between the Joseph Gall originals and the Coates or Coombs, whatever his name was, versus the, I keep saying Orson Fowler. It's not. It's what was the name? It's not Orson Fowler. Lorenzo Fowler. Fucking Orson. Who's Orson Fowler? Yeah. Anyway, they contradict each other. I mean, okay, fine. Orson Fowler came later. Lorenzo Fowler came later, and probably updated the model and whatever, but it was disproven anyway. So, anyway, combativeness. This region represents self-defense and fightful nature. It also represents energy levels. Destructiveness. This is the most latest model. This presents primitive and unrefined nature of persons. The positive point about this is the person will have good executive abilities and a dynamic nature. Secretiveness, the ability to keep secrets and hide important issues. Spirituality, the region represents intuition, occult nature, and interest in spiritual development. The other thing that phrenology also doesn't take into account that further disproves it is how people change over time. You can be born, let's say you get your skull measured at 20, and at 20 you're going to say, at 20 let's say you're a hardened atheist and you have no spiritual nature in you at all, and it doesn't represent you. Well, then by logically, in phrenological logic, your spirituality region of your skull would be very small, and then you find God and you become you become a high believer in Islam or Christianity or something like that, or you become a Hindu Buddhist, right? basically something with high tier spirituality to it, and you start reading all these Indian Tibets and things like that, does your skull change then because you've found God? No, it doesn't. Veneration, devotion to gods and elderly people, worship and love for old things. Benevolence, the region represents kindness, sympathy, and an ambition to do good with society. Constructiveness, ability to use mechanical tools and engineering equipment. Mirthfulness, the region represents fun, jokes, enjoying humour. Form, region represents memory shapes, forms, and faces. Size, the region represents the ability to judge the size, measurements, and weights of bodies. What? Colour, this region represents judgment of different colours, shades, and intensity of colours. This is another thing that's like disproven by modern medicine. Like, we know that it's not to do with that. We know it's because of an actual connection between eye and brain. There's some sort of misfiring going on if you're colourblind, or a bad wiring. Calculation, ability to perform arithmetic calculations, counting and accountancy. Eventuality, this region represents memory of events. The person will remember the entire history of anything. Tune, love and talent for music. Language, lies in the eyeballs and represents ability to communicate. How the person like talks and writes is determined by your eyeballs. And people still believe this. This is what's fascinating to me. This is so provably wrong. It's not like star signs, right? Like, I don't believe in star signs at all because I'm not stupid, but star signs are generic enough. They can say generic enough things about a person who is born in I'm born in September, right? If you look at the thing for the Virgo, right? Or maybe I wasn't born in Virgo, whatever, let's just say I was. Virgo is an earth sign. Now, this, bear in mind, right, this is also provably wrong, but it's vague enough that you can't poke a hole in it so big that it disappears entirely, because it does the correct thing of keeping itself vague enough that you can't stab it enough. You know, if I tell you, okay, I'll just read this out. A Virgo deals with information like a computer, transforming even the most jumbled set of information into organised and clear concepts. Though they long to be meticulous in all pursuits, they must remember that constantly chasing after the ideal can be destructive when applied to yourself or others. Beauty exists within our imperfections, and it's important for Virgos to learn that flaws are not defects. Above all else, they want to help. They are kind, gentle, supportive friends and lovers who use their incredible intellect and resourcefulness to problem solve. Now, bear that in mind. What if I do that about a Leo? What a Leo is, but let's do that about a Leo. Leos love to bask in the spotlight and celebrate themselves. They are natural leaders and enjoy cultivating friendships and romances that are artistically and creatively inspired. Playful Leos have no problem leaning into the drama-fueled romances that are perfectly suitable for tabloids. Leo is ruled by the sun, dazzling celestial body that governs life and vitality. The sun never goes retrograde, and likewise, Leos are renowned for their stability, loyalty, and consistency. They are dedicated friends and lovers who put their heart into every relationship. Fittingly, the Leo sign governs the heart. Lions have to watch their mates succeed until they feel threatened. They become impaired by their ego, pride, and jealousy when they start to fear their star power will be eclipsed. Now, so not everything is the same, but specifically this bit here, putting your heart into every relationship and dedicated friends and lovers, sounds almost exactly the same as a Virgo. Most people will fit any number of the things in this, which is why you can't ever say with total accuracy that it's wrong. Phrenology you can, which is why it's so interesting to me that it still exists, because phrenology is provably wrong. It's, you know, these are areas of your brain that apparently will grow if you get, that's not a thing. We know how colour is determined and how good at detecting colour you'll be, because there's a link between the eye and the brain that gets broken or miswired or any number of things that can change that. But we know what causes all these things now. We have the science now, the neuro, whatever it's called now, to know what determines all these things, or most of these things. So that's just one person who is advertising this as a real thing. Here we go. Rather than portraying phrenology as having succumbed to an inexorable progress of science, or representing the Victorians as having become less gullible, phrenology can now be understood to have been diffused and absorbed into a host of other practices and traditions. As such, many of its components live on. Alison Winter used a similar approach to understand the disappearance of mesmerism. Phrenology, as all popular fads, eventually became deeply unfashionable amongst the well-to-do who'd previously espoused it. It had degenerated into a sect of zealous extremists. Many of the first-generation phrenologists were unable to pass on their discredited knowledge to a new generation, which had many more opportunities to participate in popular sciences. Nevertheless, the British Phrenological Society, founded by Lorenzo Fowler, was disbanded only in 1967. A legacy of phrenology lived on in other aspects of measuring and comparing human heads, most notoriously the attention to cranial size, forehead shape, etc., used by late 19th and early 20th century racial anthropologists to confirm their belief that Europeans were superior to other humans. This is another part of phrenology as well. Phrenology actually has a mixed racist bag. Phrenology was both progressive and totally not progressive in terms of racism. Phrenology would espouse that blacks, or I think it was the black people, I assume, were more criminally minded because of the measurements of their head, like the deep brows and whatever, right? I don't remember what it was exactly, but that was a thing that they thought. But they also said that you could, this is very racist, but also very progressive, that you could breed out those negative traits of blackness. So, although, yeah, that's extremely racist, it's also quite progressive to even suggest that whites should mix with blacks in the 1800s. That was a very progressive idea, even though it was for racist reasons. The history of phrenology is now of interest to historians and those seeking the early roots of modern cerebral localization and neuroscience. Methodologically problematic as it was, phrenology was the first system to attribute psychological behavior to localized regions of the cerebral cortex, an approach that has, with refinements and exceptions, been increasingly vindicated since the 1860s, following the work of Pierre Paul Broca and others in France and Karl Wernicke in Germany in the 1870s. Other main principles of phrenology were generally confirmed at the end of the 19th century by the work of David Ferrier, J. Hewlins Jackson, John Bucknell, James Critchin Brown, and Giles Sherrington. So yeah, this is a weird thing as well, and this is what I was saying at the very beginning. Most of phrenology's basic premises have been vindicated, but the particulars of reading character from the skull have not. So basically, the basic underlying premise of phrenology is true, but the actual methods it used were completely bonk off. Phrenology in the 20th century, here we go. 20th century revival, this is what I was looking for. Right, okay. In the earlier 20th century, phrenology benefited of a new interest, particularly in the viewpoint of evolutionism, as on one hand, and criminal anthropology on the other. This that slightly racist bent I was on about. The most important British phrenologist of this time was the famous London psychiatrist Bernard Hollander. His main works, The Mental Function of the Brain and Scientific Phrenology, are an objective appraisal of the teachings of Gall. This is 50, 60 years after it's been disproved. Phrenology was also very popular in the US, where even automatic devices phrenological analyses were devised. In Belgium, Paul Boutz started working on phrenology from pedagogical background, using the phrenological analysis to define an individual pedagogy. Combining phrenology with typology and graphology, he coined the term approach called psychognomy, which I think I have over here somewhere. No, I don't. I thought I did. I'm never going to say this word correctly, by the way, so forgive me for the millions of times I come up with that. Now, 21st century. 200 years after Gall founded his theories, we can look back and assess the real value and impact of it. Today, much of the criticism against phrenology can be easily dismissed. However, we should be careful not to repeat the errors that were done in the past, and that through shameless commercial exploitation or through pursuit of evil, have disgraced the science and given it a bad reputation. The moment has come to advocate a positive approach to scientific phrenology, which can be considered a valuable and powerful instrument for self-knowledge, self-achievement, education, human relationships, human resources, and law enforcement. Phrenology is a true science which is there to benefit humanity. So even this guy who acknowledges that it was proven wrong goes on to say that it's actually good and that it is still relevant and helps you, even though it's provably wrong. Its methods, anyway, were provably wrong. So the Psychograph. The Psychograph claimed to mechanically discern a subject's aptitudes in a number of mental faculties. It was designed to measure the person's head according to the principles of phrenology. Lavery patented his first psychograph in 1905 while living in Wisconsin. Eventually, he joined with Frank White to form the Psychograph Company, based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which operated from 1929 to 1937. They produced a machine which measured the subject's head at 32 points and used those measurements to report the person's supposed mental attributes on a 5-point scale ranging from deficient to superior. The partners had some initial success in selling or leasing out this Psychograph. The machines were sometimes installed in theatre lobbies or department stores as novelty items for customers to use. The popularity of the device helped maintain interest in phrenology in America well into the 1930s, again 100 years after it was dead or disproven. In the late 30s, Psychograph was withdrawn from the market due to failing sales and increased skepticism from the public. There is a Psychograph on display at the Museum of Questionable Medical Devices, located in the Science Museum of Minnesota. Visitors to it can have their heads examined with the machine. So phrenology, believe it or not, is still practiced. It's practiced under a different name. It's practiced under it's under a different name now. And it's been, like it said in that website a while ago, it's been sort of morphed into a couple other things. It's been squashed together in with a couple of other mind-ready palmistry-esque things. But it does still exist. It exists. It's most popular, it seems, in Brazil and places like not third world countries as such, but they're not. No offense to Brazil, but I don't think they're at the forefront of science. So I don't know. I find that so interesting because it was so provably wrong, and yet, despite how provably wrong it was, its actual underlying principle was extremely correct, and I love that. I actually have in my living room, I'm looking at them now, 2 phrenology posters on my wall. I don't know on whose design they are based off of. I think one may be Joseph Garland and the other is the Orson Fowler. I'm saying Orson Fowler because I'm thinking of Orson Welles and I'm an idiot. Lorenzo Fowler. So that's interesting. And then I have one on the back of my bedroom door, that's definitely an older one because of the way it looks. But yeah, I found it so interesting. If I decide to do this again, I don't know if this is going to be ever anything that people actually care about because it's terrible. But if I ever decide to do this again, I'm going to do it on miasma theory because that is deeply interesting to me, and I want to look up if that is still a thing, because miasma theory is pretty much disproven by germ theory, but there's people who don't believe in germ theory. So I'd be interested to see if the people who don't believe in germ theory believe that miasma is the thing that's true, or if they believe something else. And anyway, that'll be next time, if there's a next time, if this is actually interesting to fucking anyone, which it won't be, because who would watch this?